Inventing Guitar Mathematics, and I'm here to show how easy it is to play Beatles songs, certain Beatles songs in this tuning, which is open D minor. Now the tuning is actually this, it's a 7, 5, 3, 7, 5, 3, 4, 5. So that 7, 5, 3, 4, 5, that's the tuning, and the intonation is D, D2. So when you say, for example, the tuning is standard and you mean it's E, A, D, G, B, E, you really mean it's standard tuning and intonation, because the tuning is the 5, 5, 5, 4, 5 thing you do with the frets when you're tuning the guitar, and the intonation is E. It's almost always E, but in this tuning you have, this is open D minor, same as open E minor or open C minor. Mathematically we say the tuning is the same up to isomorphism, but for guitarists we say the tuning is the same up to the point of naming the notes. So the tuning is just that number, and then when you know this is D, then you know how to name the notes in the tuning. And if it's E, then you have a different set of names for the notes. And so this creates a problem when you're learning the guitar from a record. You can identify the note, you can tell this is a C when you hear it, but the problem is you don't know if this C is in open D minor or open E minor, because in open D minor this is C, but in open E minor this is C. So when the tuning goes up, the guitar positions move back, and that's why you have to start with the tuning. So what I'm trying to show is how easily you can play these tunings, because the open D minor tuning is like the king of rhythm guitar. It's like, it's practically weaponized, these chords. And it's based on two kinds of chords. One is the bar, so that's G minor, and the bar with one finger is G major. So you have this matched set of minor and major chords that go all the way up to the neck. You can play any of them pretty much equally, with equal difficulty. And so that creates a very powerful system where you can play in a lot of keys very well. And then there's a second chord. So that this chord has its naming note on the bottom string. So this is F, D, E, F. This is the F chord. And then there's a second set of chords that have their tonic on the second string, which is this chord, or in the open position, this chord. Now, the thing that makes this tuning weird is the cross note effect, which means that when I look at the top of this chord, I see G. This looks like G in standard tuning, and it behaves like G. It's got the seventh and so forth. And then when I look at the bottom of the chord, I see D, I see drop D. I see this is F and drop D, and this is G in standard. And the thing is, they're shifted 2 frets. So this looks like I would expect this to be F from the bottom of the chord, and I expect this to be F from the top. So it gets quite confusing as to name the key or the chord. And to avoid that problem, what I'm doing here is I'm bringing all of these tunings into the D intonation. So I'm going to treat these songs like if they're an open E minor, open D minor, open C minor, I'll bring them all into the D intonation level. And that way we can talk about the keys in a consistent way, because in open D minor, I see this as F, and the key that's built on it as F. And in open E minor, I see this key as G. So to avoid that confusion, I'm going to pretend all of these songs are in the D intonation. And I want to start, before I go into the Beatles song, with some examples that will show how this tuning is very old and very common. It's not something that the Beatles invented. It's not something that that I have. It's my particular way of looking at the Beatles guitar. It's been around for a long time, and it's a big part of the San Francisco 60s sound, which has like a very minor diatonicity. It's like they're not playing in the minor mode, but they go back and forth between the major and the minor mode. And this tuning really empowers that, because you've got such a good minor chord, and the major chord is only a little bit more difficult. Whereas in, say, open D major, you've got a nice major chord, but the minor chord is more difficult. You can't slam it around as easily. So this is a song by the Beau Brummels, Laugh Laugh, and I wanted to use it to show the power of this tuning. I hate to say it, but I told you so. Don't mind me preaching to you. I said don't trust it, baby, now you know. Don't learn everything you need to go to school. Wouldn't believe me when I gave advice. I said that he was a tease. If you want help, you better ask me nice. That's me. Laugh, laugh, laugh. It seems so funny to me. Laugh, 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 laugh. Taught you how it feels to be lonely. So you have this, first of all, you have this nice 6-string minor chord, harmonically correct, which are so easy to play. And then you have this progression that goes, that is a really nice key change. G, C, F, E flat, D flat, A flat, D flat, down on the C. And so what happens is when you try and match those chords with standard, this tuning is really easily confused with standard tuning, because it's got 4 strings the same, these 4, and then just these 2 are different. And so what happens is you fit these chords into standard tuning, and you kind of just ignore the problem of what's going on, these 2 strings that are different. So when you see those chords that go G, C, it's like a circle of fifths, F, E flat, you're sort of okay, and then you come down to the E flat, and you don't have that chord in standard tuning. You don't have an E flat bar chord. In fact, E flat is one of the most difficult chords in standard tuning. You don't have an open position E flat, and you have this one here that you play but you don't get all 6 strings. So E flat is an impaired chord. So when you hear this, you have nowhere, you try all the chords, you can't find that E flat chord, so you just do the best you can and fit it into what's available in standard tuning. So when you have this this E minor, D minor tuning, you really have a powerful system of chords that you can throw around more quickly than you can in standard tuning. And I know a lot of people play Beatles songs in standard tuning, and what they do is it's kind of a trick. You use an open G2 where you're basically just playing the chords on the bottom 3 or bottom 4 strings. So you have this chord like this or this, and then so that's your F style bar chord, and then you have the A style bar chord or the B flat style bar chord that you play like this. And so you can move those chords around really fast, but you don't get that 6th string chord sound that you want, especially for the minor chord. It gives a kind of a chink chink kind of sound with the higher notes in the 6th string chord. So this, for these bar chords, it really aces standard tuning. And I want to give another example from Hendrix. Which is Angel. Jimi Hendrix, Angel. It's kind of hard to understand when you look at the sheet music. Now what I find is that the sheet music, the music is always correct, or almost always correct. Like sometimes you'll find a minor error in the sheet music, but the guitar chords are almost never correct. And what they do is they just kind of, a lot of times they just write out the music, which doesn't require any knowledge of the guitar, and then they stick these chords above the music that match the music, but they don't necessarily have anything to do with what the artist is actually playing. So in Angel, you have a funny intonation level, because for the most part it looks like Hendrix has this guitar intonated E flat. So when he's playing a Purple Haze in E flat, you figure he's playing in E, a standard in E, because the probability of E flat in standard tuning is low, and the probability of E is pretty good. So when you're looking at these chords, and Hendrix in this song has his guitar intonated at C, it really throws you for a loop, because when the tuning goes up, or the capo position goes up, you can recognize the pattern of the chords pretty easily. You just say, oh, his guitar is just tuned up, and if I just put a capo at a certain fret, I can match it. But when the tuning goes below the nut, when you detune the guitar, then the chords go off the deep end, and you have to find them somewhere else, and so it really throws you for a loop. So in this song, it's kind of hard to realize that the key he's actually playing in is F. The recorded key is E flat, but what's happened is he's playing in F relative to the standard D2 intonation. He's playing in the key that you would see as being F. And so you can't always read the chords right off of the sheet music. You may have to transpose it. And usually it's not usually the guitar key is not way off of the observed key or the key signature in the sheet music. It's usually like two steps above or below. But you have to take that into account. So when I looked at this, at first this song, it didn't make any sense until I realized, oh, its guitar is intonated at C, and then it sort of clicks into, oh, it's that key of E tuning. The key of the key of F in this tuning is very strong, because D minor, open D minor, is directly related to the key of F. But you you don't really expect that when you first approach this tuning. You probably learn in the key of D. It's got a really killer kind of Piedmont blues style in the key of D, and so you don't think that F is the most original key in this tuning, if not the most expressive. So this starts with a kind of one of these head-spinning introductions where you're not sure what the key is until the last minute. So that's it's like a transcendent chord progression on the guitar where he has that thing where he's on the C. It goes up to the G, and then he walks it up these tonic top chords. C sharp, B flat, E flat. That brings to mind that Wind Cries Mary progression. Except the Wind Cries Mary is in drop G, along with Castles Made of Sand is another Hendrix drop D tuning, and I think Little Wing. Now Little Wing is just like a classic open E minor progression. This 9 chord, but actually then you have to compare that to the drop G, because this is a very strong pentatonic tuning, because you've got your pentatonic scale is the same as in standard on these bottom 3. And it's also got the matching bass string here, so this is a really good song for Little Wing. It's a really E pentatonic song, but it turns out that drop G is also it's like open G is a very strong E pentatonic figure because it's related to E minor, and then when you tune the top string up to E, from D to E, go from open G to drop G, you swing it in favor of the E pentatonic chord or scale. So there's a kind of a confusion going on here between open E minor and drop G tuning, because they sort of have a number of strings in common, so you can get them confused. Now, another unique progression in this tuning that I want to mention is the one that goes with "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down," and if you ever play this, it's kind of we were hungry, just barely alive. By May 10th, Richmond fell. There was a time I remember oh so well. The night they drove old Dixie down, and all the people were ringing. Night they drove old Dixie down, people were singing, na 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 na. Night they drove old Dixie down, and all the people were singing. They went na 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 na. B minor, B flat, F, F minor 6, C, E7. So that's a really unique progression of chords, and you just can't find those on in standard tuning, because you got the B minor you could play but take more fingers. The B flat you could play, but it takes all 4 fingers. And then you get this as F, but you can't play this F because, well, you could play it, but you'd have to play like a bar at the 5th chord, and then you put that kind of C chord in front of it. So it would be a really hard chord to grab quickly. And then you come down on this F minor 6, and again, you might be able to reach this if you're really good and got all 4 fingers, but it's really a difficult grip, and so to do that quickly in that progression would be very difficult. And then that's C, so you could play that pretty easily. But this is a kind of a unique D7. I don't think you can. So what happens is when you see a progression like that in the sheet music, or you hear it in a record, if you're not in the right tuning, you can't match it. And so what happens is you think, well, somehow they're just tuned higher or lower than you are. But actually it's the difference in the tuning, and the problem is it doesn't matter how well trained you are in music or how much you know about standard tuning, you have no way of knowing what the structure of this tuning is without interrogating it. And what interrogation is you ask, okay, if I play this chord progression, how does it come out on this tuning? And what you have is a situation kind of like when the electron is spinning around the nucleus of an atom, and you can't know where the electron is at any particular point in time, but you know it's somewhere in the orbit. So what I'm doing here is, like, I don't know, for example, if the Beatles are playing this chord. It might be hard to tell from this chord. but what I know is it's somewhere in the orbit between those different ways of playing F. And so if you want to know exactly where they play a particular note at a particular time in a song, could be difficult. But if you want to know the general orbit that they're playing in, you can know it with a very high degree of specificity. So what I want to do is sketch out the keys in this tuning. It's just kind of a general landmark. So the 1 key or the 0 key is the key that starts on the open string, and that's the first one everyone learns, and it's probably the one that has the most advanced guitar, but it's also one that's like easily recognizable, and so you can, it's kind of a telltale key that everyone can see what you're doing, whereas the other keys are a little bit more confusing. But the 1 key goes like this: 1 chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then whatever that weird chord is for the 7, and then back to the octave. So in particular, you look at this kind of like a 1, 6, 4, 5 progression. 1, 6, 4, 5. So if you like, you have Mr. Moonlight, and it's in open G minor, but it can kind of go back and forth between G minor and D minor. And so you walk up to the 4th chord. And we love you, Mr. Moonlight. So the point is, that chord that's it's got a surprise factor, because first of all, you can reach it so fast as it's just a bar, and also it's got all 6 strings, so that's why this tuning is so good for these 1, 6, 4, 5 progressions. So that's the 1 key. 1, 6, 4, 5. And then in the key of C, that's the one that has the 6th here at the 7th fret, A minor, the F here, the G here, and so you get a thing like the like Led Zeppelin, Dwyer Makur. So, and then you move that, so that's a good key. You like that key because it's spaced nicely in the middle of the guitar. You move that down to B flat. Same kind of thing, but this key, B flat, is a nice open position B flat. It makes a bar with 2 fingers, and it has a tonic on the 2nd string. So this C is a nice contrast to this G, because this C has a 3rd in the bass. This is E, C, E. So it's voicing is different than the bar with one finger, or the bar, and so you have these two chords that are complementary, and what happens in this tuning is you're playing almost everything off of either this bar chord, the major minor thing, or this C kind of chord, or you're using those chords as a derivative where you start with the chord and then you deform it in a voice leading progression. So the B flat is the key. It has its sixth at the 5th fret, G minor, and has this nice open position where you get this kind of Fine Young Cannibals progression. So B flat is a really good key. In fact, this tuning has got the best in the class E, B flat, and E. There's no other tuning that can compete in those keys. And so the B flat, and the next one down is A. And so A is the key that has its 4th chord in the open position. Has its 6th here at the 4th fret, and there's something about that minor chord at the 4th fret. It's a little bit magic. And you get this thing where you have this sort of natural progression that appears in Free as a Bird, where the 4 chord is a minor. And then G is the key that has its 4 chord in the open position. It has its 6th here at the 2nd fret, and then it's, so that's G. And then finally we come down to F, and F is the key that has its 6th chord in the open position, 4 chord here, 5 chord, and then a second copy of the 6th chord here. So we have So let's take that apart. So it's F, that's F sharp diminished, G minor, and then this thing where the minor chord moves up 3 frets. Back to the 1 chord. So that's a walk down, 1, 3, transition chord, 2, and then this jazzy approach chord. This is your 7 sharp 9, F sharp 7 sharp 9, that goes back to the F, and then it falls down to the 6. With the augmented, and then this progression is a deformation of the G minor chord. So the tonic, have 3 tonics in that chord, and they can all walk down individually or together. So this is the G flat augmented chord, then back to the G minor 7, and then G minor 6. So that could walk down like this. Or like this. Or on the bass string. And those, I'll call that the descending minor progression, because there's no possibility of confusing it. And again, that shows how I know the chord progression, but I'm not exactly sure like which notes are they walking down. So it's kind of a mix and match thing, and just use whatever you want or what sounds closest to the record. And so then that song ends with this. So what you want to do in the key of F is keep your eye on this 4 chord here. Is it a major or is it a minor? And that applies to, of course, all the chords. Is this an F or an F minor? But particularly watch that B flat minor, because there is no open position. You have this B flat here, but there's no open position B minor. Sometimes you'll see this in this sort of turnaround where it's F, F7, B flat minor. So that's a turnaround. And then there's the ending on the augmented chord, and the augmented chord comes around 2 ways. This one is where you have, this is the 5 chord, and using the augmented chord is more 7th. It's more 7th chord than the 5/7. 5/7, 5 augmented. And then the other way that the augmented seems to come about is like an in-between chord in one of these voice leading progressions. So they usually call this in the book, it's called the G minor major 7. So this is G minor, this is the major 7. But I prefer to call it, this is like G flat augmented. And the reason is because that's more guitaristic. It moves up 4 frets. It's the same chord every 4 frets. And so that just kind of, I think, makes more sense in G minor major 7. It's a little bit awkward. So this tuning is one that the Beatles are using, sort of alpha omega, from the earliest songs like Cayenne that you hear in the Beatles anthology, or they have these old tapes that they made at home. And Cayenne is like they're just playing blues in open E minor and just riffing on that shamelessly on the E pentatonic scale. And then you have like the sort of like the very last song, Real Love, is in this tuning, and then you see like Lennon and Harrison are using this tuning in post-Beatles work. And you can find examples of the Traveling Wilburys where they're using this tuning. But so for Real Love we have all my little plans and dreams, lost like some forgotten dream. Seems like all I really was wait for you like little girls and boys playing with their little toys. Seems like all we really were, waiting for love. No need to be alone. No need to be alone. It's real love. It's real, real love. Real. So one of the things I like about that is that way that that augmented chord is so surprising in the first four chords. F, A minor, D minor, C augmented. It's just kind of magic the way they use that instead of, say, C or something more obvious. And then this kind of goes back to that ending of the Till There Was You. And that's the 6-9 chord. So you've got this is 6, and this adds the 9. And this 6 chord, major 6 chord, is very Beatlesque, and you can't really duplicate it in standard tuning. So that's another thing to watch for when they're using the 6 chord, and it gives you kind of a Memphis Chuck Berry sound. So going back to some of the earlier songs, the reason that I'm here now is because when I presented a mathematical study of guitar at the American Academy for the Advancement of Science Pacific Division meeting in San Diego in 2016, I used Lucy in the Sky as an example, and I knew that I had the tuning right, but what surprised me was that I could also tell the intonation of the guitar. And I thought, well, if I can tell the tuning and the intonation for Lucy in the Sky, maybe I could do that with every Beatles song. So what I did is I took every song I could find, either recorded or sheet music, and I tried to play it in about 8 different tunings. So that would be like standard, drop D, drop G, double drop D, open G minor, and then the 3 sisters, I call them. They have the open D is in the middle, it's sandwiched between open D minor on the left, which is Dad Fad, and Dad Gad on the right. So those tunings there, they differ by 1 note on 1 string. Open D minor, open D, and Dad Gad. There's the only difference is this string is F, F sharp, or G. And they're so completely different. And it's weird because they have 5 strings that are the same, 1 string different, but it's right in the middle of the guitar. So it throws you off more than if it's one of the outer strings. And so what happens is those tunings have all the same octaves, and they have the same shuffle patterns. But that 1 string makes them just basically completely different languages. And So this shows the complexity of the tuning, which has a very simple rule. The simple rule is that 7, 5, 3, 4, 5. But the number of different functions and relations that come out of that tuning is very large. So what you think of is, you think of the tuning as a bag of tricks. And it takes a long time to learn all of the tricks. It takes, you know, on the order of 5 years, say, to master tuning. And knowing one tuning converts no knowledge of another tuning. So it doesn't matter if you know open D really well, you still have to learn open D minor all over again, as though it was just a completely different language. So I pay a lot of attention to these early songs because they're so transparent. They're, you know, the Beatles catalog is really nice because it goes from this early kind of juvenilia pieces where they're just kids at home on the tape recorder to the more advanced music. And so it really lays out a nice system of guitar where it looks like they are going through this tuning systematically and looking for every useful key, for every interesting chord progression that they can find. And this is from their mellifluous period, where they have the mellifluous, they go, there is a place where I can go, where I feel love, when I feel blue, and it's my mind, and there's no time when I think of you and the things you do go round my head, like the thing you said, like I love you and only you. In my mind there's no sorrow, don't you know that it's true? There'll be no sad tomorrow, don't you know that it's true? If it feels alright now, hold me tight. Tell me I'm the only one, and I'm right. Never be the lonely one, so hold me tight. Tonight, tonight, it's you. I don't know what it is to hold me tight. Being here alone tonight feels alright now. So what I like about that song is that, first of all, that turnaround, and they kind of play the shuffle over a turnaround thing. And then that part where it goes, I don't know what it means to hold you tight. That A flat is, it's just so cool. And then the I've got something to say that might cause you pain, and if I catch you talking, boy, I'm gonna let you down and leave you flat. can't do that. Everybody is green, because I don't want to rock your love and sing. And that way they laugh in my face. So that's different than it's going up to the, instead of the A flat, it's going up to the A. So these are really, each one of these progressions, you can usually just read it right off of the sheet music, just interpret the keys in open D minor, and each one is like a little jewel, has like some little element that's really original, that's surprising, and here's another example. And I think this is really interesting because according to Walter Everett, the Beatles were kind of embarrassed by this song because of the "Please Lock Me Away" and "Don't Allow the Day Here Inside." But it's still like a really good chord progression. Please lock me away, don't allow the day here inside. The second time, so I wait, and in a while I will see my true love smile. She may come, I know not when she does, down goes. Oh baby, until then, lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I B flat 6 has got that Beatle harmony sound, and then the approach chord there on the C, and that's another one where the recorded key is E flat, and I'm playing it in F. So I think they had their guitar tuned down to C for that one. I noticed a lot of times these early songs, they seem to have like a 1 fret D tune. So you play an F here and it appears on the record to be E. And I think they had a kind of an ethic, the Beatles, that they didn't want you to know what the tuning is, and they did a good job of keeping it a secret. But I talked to so many interviewers. There are a couple of references, like one time Lennon says that he thought Buddy Holly was playing in A. They thought Buddy Holly was playing in G, but later on they found it was A, but it didn't matter. And what he's talking about is Buddy Holly is playing like a kind of electric guitar, open A instead of open G. And then one time Paul said he composed Here, There, and Everywhere with the guitar in E, and presumably means an open E. But other than that, they don't seem to give you any clues about what tuning they're using, and I think part of it is because they don't want you to realize how simple and easy it is to play these. Now that's an essential part of their music, the beat music idea is that you can play these things on guitar. They're up-tempo, they're easy to play, they're expressive. They don't have this quality like classical guitar where it's all smooth on top, but you feel like underneath they're paddling like hell because it's just like really technically difficult, and you can see that they have to like spend a lot of time rehearsing and practicing to get that kind of classical level, whereas the Beatles, what they're playing, almost always easy to play. There's some chords that are a little bit difficult, and often the tempo that they're playing is difficult to match. And I think sometimes they clearly speed up the recording sound, because there's some things that they play that are just like over the top, and nobody could play that fast. But they're still not difficult, and they're not aiming for this technical level of expertise like you have in guitar boogie, or like in some of the Johnny Smith kind of really technically difficult guitar. That's not what they're doing. They're have an easy system of chords, and they're working it for everything that they can. You'll never know how much I really love you. Never know how much I really care. Listen, you wanna know a secret you promise not to tell. Whoa, whoa, closer. Let me whisper in your ear. Say the words you long to hear. I'm in love with you. Whoa, whoa. I've known a secret for a day or two. Nobody knows, just me too. So what I think is interesting about that is that the first part is pretty much straightforward. 1, 2, 5, 1, 2, 5. So that's pretty standard progression. But then in the second part goes up to the 4 chord, and it's acting like the key has changed to B flat, and it's got this 1, 2, 3 chord thing, and then somehow it gets back to the F again, and then that introduction. It's kind of like they're using F and F minor keys. They're sort of the same, but they just have an interchangeable major minor chord at 1 or 2 places in the progression, and then it's the same. Now this one isn't. It's sort of an F, sort of in D minor. And this comes from the Beatles anthology. It doesn't match the recording, but it's an outtake. And I think that I'm Only Sleeping is in the recording is in open G minor, and so it's easy to cross over between open G and open D minor, because you have this bar, and in D minor it's on the 3rd string. That's where the 3rd is, on the 3rd string, and in open G minor it's on the 2nd string. So there's kind of this parallel where you just shift the chords over one set of strings to go between open D minor and open G minor. But this one shows how they're using the open D minor tuning. When I wake up early in the early in the morning, I lift my head, I'm still yawning when I'm in the middle of a dream. shake me, no, don't shake me, leave me where I am, I'm only sleeping. So that shows how this B flat has this nice major 7, B flat, then this is the B flat note, goes down 1, major 7, and also has a 9 too. So that the bar with 2 fingers, C major, makes a major 7th easily. You're gonna lose that girl. You're gonna lose that girl if you don't take her out tonight. I'm gonna change your mind, and I will take her out tonight, and I will treat her kind. You're gonna lose that girl. You're gonna lose that girl. You're gonna lose that girl. I'll make a point of taking her away from you. Watch what you do. The way you treat her, what else can I do? Same old diatonic chords. And what's interesting about this song is the way the key changes to G sharp, C sharp, G sharp, C sharp, F sharp, walks back down to the F. So this is one of the advantages of this tuning is you can change keys so easily that it opens up the possibility of innovative chord progressions, because the facility of I can play this G sharp as well as I can play this G, and I can play this E flat as well as I can play this G. So it gives me a lot of versatility. I'm sure, for I would remember all the things we did. Understand it's true, yes it is, it's true, yes it is. I could be happy with you by my side if I could forget her, but it's my pride, it's my pride. Is what I said tonight, for red is the color that might make me blue in spite of you. It's true, yes it is, it's true, yes it is. Now, one thing I noticed when in this tuning is you kind of want to concentrate on the triads. The major chord, the minor chord, the augmented chord. They're all triads, and so when you're reading the sheet music and you see like a minor 7 or the 7 chord, there's a good chance that on guitar they're just playing the straight triad without the 7th, or they're looking at the 7th as just being a note that's added to the bar, as though it's like not really a different chord, it's just a passing note. And that gives you a kind of a crisper hard rock sound than when you use like the minor 7 chords. Because in standard, what happens is the minor chord is kind of hard to play. It's like a 3-finger chord, and it's hard to move around, so you're playing the minor 7. And it sounds pretty good, but it's not quite the kind of the hard rock harmonization that you want for some of those songs. And so what I notice is that when you see the minor 7, what it's showing you is that that's the correct harmonic analysis, but it's not necessarily the chord they're playing. They may just be playing the triad. Who knows how long I love you? Oh, I love you still. Will I wait a lonely life if you want me to? This F chord has kind of an unusual open position. This is F, A, F, F, A, F, and it's kind of like a G7. So I think it's a question of whether that kind of a trill is there, or So another thing to watch with this B flat chord goes down to the B minor, but it also frequently goes down to the D minor. Which is an interesting 4-fret change, and appears in several songs. Now, the first copyright of the Lennon-McCartney portfolio is it starts in 1962 with "All I've Gotta Do," and that's in this open D minor tuning, and I think it's kind of interesting, this nice chord, and then it's in the mellifluous period. Whenever I want you around, yeah. All I gotta do is call you on the phone, and you'll come running home. That's all I gotta do. And when I wanna kiss you, all I gotta do is whisper in your ear the words you want to hear, and I'll be kissing you. And the same goes for me. Whenever you want me, I'll be there. Just gotta call me, just gotta call on me. You just gotta call on me. And when I wanna kiss you. So it's got that minor chord again, where very romantic sounding G minor to the B flat minor. Now, the original Beatles sheet music came out in the ATV scores. ATV is the publisher, and when they started coming out in the early 70s, they often had a key signature that was not the same as the record. And at first I thought, well, that's just because the transcriptionist wants to play it on the piano, and so he transcribed it in a piano key. But later on I started looking at those, and I decided, no, those are actual Beatle keys, even though they don't match the record. Those are keys that the Beatles used for those songs, and they showed them to the transcriptionist. They were transcribed in that original key, and then later on they thought better of it. There was a better key, and so they changed it. So these songs, the difference between the ATV sheet music key and the record shows how the Beatles are searching for the right key, because the keys form a probability distribution, and the keys are not equally likely. So you've got like 12 keys, but the probability of each key is not 1/12. What happens on the guitar is like one key is way better than the others, or sometimes you get two keys that are sort of comparable, but it's certainly not the case that every key is just as good. And so if you imagine a capo that's moving up the guitar one fret at a time, instead of letting the key rise with the capo, what you do is you transpose the key down one step for each step the capo goes up. And that way you maintain the observed pitch. The observer will see the key isn't changing even though the capo is going higher. And so that produces this really weird effect where you can hear that the sound color is getting higher because the capo is moving up, the strings are getting shorter, it's more of a tinnier timbre to the notes. But at the same time that it's getting higher, the key is staying the same. Now, if you try to do that chromatically, what happens is, okay, you start in open position, you got a nice key, and you move the fret up the capo up 1 fret, and all of a sudden you got a really difficult key. And what you're really doing is just kind of sliding that open key up 1 and trying to, you know, compensate for the string that with a bar or something like that. So what you find is you go up, you have a good key here, not so good here, very good key here, and pretty good key here, very good key here. Oops, I guess this is A is a really good key for A or A minor. B flat's a good key. B, not so much. C is a good key. C sharp is probably the worst key, the key with the lowest probability of being used. And of course, the 1 key or the 0 key is the one that is so obvious that everyone learns as the first key. So what happens with all I've got to do is, the recording is in D minor, but the ATV sheet music is in A minor. Whenever I want you around it, all I gotta do is call you on the phone and you'll come running home. That's all I gotta do. Whisper in your ear the words you wanna hear, and I'll be kissing you. So there they got that 4 chords on the open position in that thing where it moves up 3 frets, puts it in F minor. So I think that song was originally written in A minor, and then they changed it to the D minor. It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet. Till I belong to you. Everybody is having fun. Singing all night. It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet. It won't be long yet. Till I belong to you. Left me, I'm so alone. I'm alone. Be good like I know I should. So what I find interesting about that is F, C sharp, F, that ostinato bass. And C sharp, F. It's kind of weird, but it works. And then the minor, got to F, 6 chord, and then the 4, walking up to the tonic. And then the second part is one of these voice leading progressions that starts off with F and then deforms it to E augmented, so half step down augmented, E flat 6, D7. Very cool progression. Now, Michelle has this lead, probably George Harrison. But in the record, you can tell that they're not playing the chords that go with that. It's obviously the chords are in open G, and Harrison's lead is in open D minor. So that's a good example where you can show that they're using two different tunings in the same song. And I think that's kind of a general principle, actually, that they probably don't have guitars tuned the same way because they get a richer tonality. Say if you combine open D minor and open G, you get a very rich sound, but it may be hard to tell the guitar parts apart. So in Michelle, you have that descending minor progression. F minor, F minor major 7 or E augmented, F minor 7, F minor 6, and then the minor 4 and the 5 chord. Michelle, my belle, these are words that together well. Michelle, my belle, someday Monday we'll play a band ensemble. I love you, I love you, I love you. That's all I want to say. And I will find a way. So that's George Harrison's lead in Michelle, and I think it's pretty specific for open D minor. You just can't find another tuning that you can play that in and make it sound right. So that kind of suggests the song was written in this tuning, and in the recording they're using open G to play those minor chords, and it's a D minor is really a strong open D tuning. So I think what's happening here is the song was originally written in this tuning, and then they're looking for a way to kind of diversify it, and so I'm not sure which one came first, but it's a good example of a Beatles song where you can tell for sure that they're using two different tunings. And I think that's a general principle, that they probably don't have guitars that are tuned the same way, because if you combine open D minor and open G, you get a much richer tonality than if you had just one of the tunings or both guitars in the same tuning. So that suggests that there's a kind of a version of Michelle that I don't hear on the record, but it's using this descending minor progression. And it's got that modulation between the F minor and the F, as though they sort of just think it's the same key. Michelle, my belle, these are words that go together well. Michelle, Michelle, my belle, someday won't be And then that same kind of chord progression seems to come up in fixing a hole. I'm fixing a hole where the rain gets in and stops my mind from wandering where it will go. And it really doesn't matter if I'm right where I belong, right where I belong. So that's F, C augmented, minor, B flat 9, and it's basically that same Michelle thing where it's the minor, major 7, minor 7, minor 6, and then the minor 4 chord. And these songs seem to sort of trace to the taste of honey. A taste of honey, tasting much sweeter than wine. I dream of your first kiss, and then I feel again I miss a brain. A taste of honey, tasting much sweeter than wine. I feel richer as I feel richer. I'll come back for the honey and you. So it's got this. This is F sharp now, not F, but same descending progression, descending minor progression. The guitar is an intelligent machine that can recognize the musical key. And you probably know this trick where you are playing a recording and you want to find the key, and so you move the note up on the first string until you get to that note that you recognize as the center of the key or the first note of the key. And that obviously depends on how the string is tuned. So if we have the song, if we hear the chord F in this tuning, which is open D minor, I see the F as being here. So the guitar recognizes the F as being in this position, a pattern in this position, and it sees this position as E flat and this position as G. Now, if the guitar were tuned the same way, but at open E minor, then the guitar would see this chord as G. It would see this chord as A, and it would see this chord as F. And on the other hand, if the guitar was tuned to open C minor, and that name creates some confusion because there's another C minor tuning, but if it were just the same as this open D minor tuning I'm in, tuned down to C, open C minor, then you would see this would be C sharp, this would be E flat, and this would be F. So you have the same observed pitch, the same key signature for all three of those positions, and it seems like you have no way to tell them apart. The guitar can recognize which one is which, and to go back to that trick of recognizing the key on the first string, suppose we have just one string and it goes from the 0th fret to the 12th fret. So if we have the musical key is the same at any pitch, goes up and down, it's the same structure, then you can't really tell the difference between the keys. But when you place the key between the boundaries on guitar, then you have each key is different. So for example, I have this would be the 0 key, the key that's on the note that the string is zeroed in on, goes. So it goes all the way down to the bottom and have a clear sense of where that bottom is. Now the -1 key, the one that starts like one note below the note that the string is zeroed on, it goes down here, and then the next note this is not available, it's gone below the nut and then it reappears here. So that means that each key, as you place it on the string according to where the first note is, has a distinct order, and you can tell the difference between them. So the same thing happens here, which is you cannot tell how the guitar is tuned when you hear this chord, but the guitar can recognize which guitar key is in use, because it makes a difference. And to show that, I want to compare these two songs, Nowhere Man, where the recorded key is E flat, and then my other one is Not a Second Time. That's an early Beatles song where the recorded key is G, and I want to show you how I can recognize that the guitar key for both of those is F. So Nowhere Man goes like this. He's a real nowhere man sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody. Doesn't have a point of view, knows not where he's going to. Isn't he a bit like you and me? Nowhere Man, please listen. You don't know what you're missing. The world is at your command. He's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody. So what I like about that song in the key of F, the guitar key of F, which could match the recorded key if this was an open C minor, is, well, first of all, you probably know that I'm keen on this B minor, B flat minor transition. But also, I really like the part where it goes. Because those chords you could do in, you know, a lot of different tunings, but that open position, it matches the record. And that's an important part of the process, because you can play these songs in a lot of different tunings, and you make the arrangement, and you think, well, that's good, and it fits the record, sort of, and you know, I could play with other people playing the same song. But if you really look closely with the record and the chords on the guitar, they don't match. So if you're playing, for example, in open G, where the recording is in open D, the chords will sort of sound the same, but they'll be in a different place on the guitar, and you'll be able to tell the difference. So not only do I like that change, but I'm also keyed in on this E flat chord, because I recognize that as a boundary chord that can't go any lower. Now, if it went one step lower, it would still be the same voicing, but you can recognize this chord has the open strings, and it doesn't have the left hand muting that the bar chord has. So this is the last of the matched set of bar chords that go up and down the neck. And in particular, it can't go down 2 frets without having to go somewhere up here on the neck. For example, you have the B flat chord, but the B minor, this note has to go down 1, and so the B flat minor chord it doesn't have an open position chord, and it only is here. Now, when you have a chord like that you only play in one position, that's kind of an advantage, because you're not going, is it this chord or is it this chord? You know, like B flat minor, it has to be at this bar, although it has a second one here, which is not quite so useful. So there's a reason why I like this song better in F than in E flat. And so what I'm saying is that the guitar is an intelligent machine, and it can recognize that pattern. The evidence is a little bit soft, but it's still quite distinct, and if you play this in different keys over and over again, you come to the conclusion that this is the right key and E flat is not. Now, in Not a Second Time, you have just the opposite situation, where the recording appears to be in G. So if it were actually in the F position, so I'm standardizing the key here all to the D reference range. Because what happens with open E is you have okay, open E, this is E minor, this is E, this is F, this is G, this is A. So it matches the bar chords in standard tuning. So there's a good, clear relation between standard tuning in intonation and open E minor. The bars are in the same position. So when you go down to open D minor, what happens is you recognize this chord, F, but you don't recognize this E flat chord. And then when you go down to open C minor, this is F up here, this is E flat, and this is C sharp coming down on the C, and it's like you had no way to make sense of those chords in standard tuning. You're just a puzzle. How can you play an open C, that C chord in the open position, that has this voicing, because it's not there. So this is Not a Second Time. You know you made me cry. I see no reason to wonder why I cried for you. You've changed your mind. I see no reason to change mine. I cried, it's true. You're giving me the same old line. I'm wondering why. You heard Megan, you're back again. No, not a second time. And then there's the piano solo. So I'm always looking for that melodic hook somewhere around. It's usually easy to find in the same range as the chords, and I like that way, the way that comes down on the open string. And I also recognize that the sixth chord there is a bottom chord that can't go any lower. It could go up, but it can't go any lower, or it'll have to appear somewhere higher on the neck, and that'll be something you can recognize in the recording. Now, the key of F in open D minor is a very strong key, but the key of E flat and the key of G are also useful keys. So you're looking at maybe well over a dozen songs that the Beatles played that are in F in open D, and almost the only exception of all the songs that are in the record key of F is Yesterday, which Paul tells us in the outtake recording on the Beatles anthology. He tells the recording engineer he's playing in G, but it'll be F for you. So that's taking advantage of that brilliant D minor key in open G. But all of the other ones that are in the recorded key of F seem to be in open D minor. But there are, say, half a dozen or less keys in E flat and another half dozen in G. So the key is useful, and so I want to show a couple of the E flat keys. If you ever leave me, I'll be sad and blue. Don't you ever leave me, I'm so in love with you. Oh, the birds in the sky would be sad and lonely if they knew that was my one and only. Don't be sad, don't be bad to me. The leaves on the trees would be softly sighing if they heard from the birds that don't be sad. So that fits really well in E flat, and I want to point out one thing here where in this tuning you like the triads, because this chord is a triadic chord because it doesn't have anything but the triad notes in it. It's F, C, A, and that's all. There's no seventh. So if I play that. But I know you won't leave me, but you told me so with the seventh, and I have no intention of letting you go, just as long as you let me know you won't be dead to me. So those seventh chords that you read in the sheet music, they don't really sound right, because you don't want that seventh there. It gives it a softer, jazzier tonality. You want to hear just the minor chord. So also in E flat is this one. Give her all my love, that's all I do, and And if you saw my love, you'd love her too. And a love like ours could never die, as long as I have you near me. And then you have that double stops. And this lick, that's clearly keyed on this as a boundary condition, because that can't go any lower and still be played, and it can go higher, but then you lose that open. So, the first one I played, Bad to Me, is in the ATV sequence of music copyrights, like the 5th song, 1963. So that shows that by that time they're already hip to the idea that E flat is an interesting key in this tuning. And then, before this dance is through, I think I'll love you too. I'm so happy when you dance with me. I don't wanna kiss or hold your hand. It'd be funny to try to understand. Unless there's nothing I would really rather do. I'm not happy just to dance with you. I don't need to hug or hold you tight. I just want to dance with you tonight, 'cause there's nothing that I really rather do. 'Cause I'm happy just to dance with you. Just to dance with you. This is everything I need. Before this dance is through, I think I'll love you too. I'm so happy when I dance with you. So, again, that's a strong E flat key, making, relate to C minor. And what I particularly like about it is the way the E flat key, E flat chord, goes down on the D7. And that's kind of an interesting change I'm always keyed on, is when you have the tonic chord and it drops down one fret. It creates kind of an ambivalent key situation. And then you have this example, All My Loving. The lips I am missing, I hope that my dreams will all come true. While I'm away, I'll ride home every day, and I'll send all my love to you. All my loving now. This descending chord progression I'm trying to play is the C sharp minor, G sharp augmented, coming down on the E. All my love I will send to you. So that's in the key of E, and it's probably the only one in this tuning that's in the key of E. But I like it because it comes down on the open D chord. But then there's also that's in E, and then in F you have this. So this version I like because it's coming down on the 6th chord in the open position, and this progression it's also in a nice position, and that comes from this. So you have the D minor, first position, second position, third position, and then the octave. So this minor chord, it looks kind of like a chord you play in standard tuning, which would be like a 13th or like a 7th. This would be like a 7th chord, add the 6th. It's probably the most difficult minor chord position. It's obviously way harder than this one, and this one is somewhat limited use. So, but this one is an important one, and it's a nice voice leading progression. D minor, augmented, F. So what happens when you have these two keys? They're like sister keys, where you have like C and B flat, or in this case you have sister keys where it's F and E, and you can achieve the same recorded key with two different guitar keys, and they're both nice arrangements. Then that gives you the opportunity to have one guitar in one guitar key and another guitar in another guitar key, and you get a richer tonality. So one guitar is going down F to this 6th chord, and the other guitar is going now from the tonic here, and it has to reach the 6th chord up there. So that I think Beatles are always searching for these keys and considering, like, what advantage would I have if I move the key to this position? What advantage would I have if I move this key to another tuning? And the intonation is the most confusing part, because what you hear, this chord, is the product of the intonation and the tuning. And so you forget that the intonation can change the key, and you jump to the conclusion that the key that you're hearing in the record must be the same key that is on the guitar. But actually they're independent. The key that you observe in the record and the key on the guitar have no direct relation. they're usually close, but they don't have a direct relation. And so the way you know which key is correct is you recognize the key on the guitar. So once I recognize the guitar key is F, then I can figure out, well, how do I intonate the guitar to match the record? That's the right step. You go through the tuning, the tuning to find the key, and then you use the key to find the intonation. And that avoids the mistake when you just assume, well, I hear this note, and so I hear that note here in the guitar, and that's where it must be. This tuning is an A9 tuning that Chet Atkins called Honolulu Blue. It's one of the slack key tunings, which I characterize as a tuning which has a non-perfect interval in the 3 bass strings. So usually the interval between these bass strings would be like perfect fourth for standard. It would be perfect fifth, perfect fourth for the G family tunings, and it would be a perfect fourth, perfect fifth for the D family tunings, and then the C family, which is kind of like open G, where the bass string is tuned down to C, so like open G, drop C tuning that has like a perfect fifth, And so those 4 categories of tunings are all, they kind of have a good shuffle position with the possible exception of the C tunings. And they're all pretty common in rock, whereas the slack key tunings have a jazzy sound, and you can kind of tell the tonality is different in some way. So what happens here is this is the same as standard tuning, which is 5-5-5-4-5, except that the D string is tuned down to C sharp. So that makes it 5-4-5-4-5. And so it's the same, except for that one note is tuned down on the D string, and so that means when you're playing chords in this tuning, you play them the same as standard, but you have to augment the note on that bass string, the 4th string, by 1 fret. And what's remarkable is how much that changes the tuning from standard, because you have 5 strings that are the same and 1 string that's just 1 semitone off, and yet it just changes everything. So even when you finger the same chords in standard, they have a different tonal expression. For example, this would be A7, Well, let me back up. So first of all, you have this is the open chord is this lush A9. It's quite extraordinary how different this is from standard. And if you know this tuning and you know the Beatles song All Across the Universe, they just kind of click together like magnets that are attracting each other, because the tonality of this tuning is an unmistakable match with that song. And what happens with the introduction is these top strings are the same as standard, so you could play that all in standard tuning and it fits, but then when you come down on the chord, which you're lost because you can't finger those chords in standard tuning. And this is one of the songs where I disagree with what the chord analysis is in the sheet music, which you have like the ATV score is in the key of E flat, and the Beatles complete score is in the key of D, and the record is actually in D flat. And so I also don't agree with the analysis, because what I see is you have, this is the D chord, where I had to augment this fourth string note, and that falls down, or you could play it like this with a bass string, and then that falls down on the D major 7. When you lift this one up, that's C sharp, the major 7, and also this one goes down, so you get, and then that's a F sharp minor chord, and then the E minor. I mean, it just, it's the E minor 7. And it just behaves differently than the E minor 7 that you would play in the standard tuning, particularly because they go to that G minor. So this is D, and this is another variant of that D major 7. The F sharp minor, E minor 7, G minor 7, or
the song I'm writing is no surprise. It's just the way